friends.
It is not an accident that we're all here today in this venue to encourage one another. Certainly you encourage me, you being the wind beneath my wings as I'm out there shaking some things up, stirring some things up, trying to get our country back on the right track. So it's such a treat to get to be with you today, and how awesome that through the video links too, that we are spread apart physically so far away, so many miles, and these different states that are being able to participate with us today too. And yet we are being able to be brought together in a united mission of glorifying God and being encouraged and understanding what real hope is, what everlasting hope is. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm talking real hope, not that hokey-changey stuff that some politicians want you to believe in. I'll try not to get too political on you today, but it's kind of in my blood. And we're going to talk about real hope, though, everlasting hope that we have for our families and for our country. And it's so great to be here in beautiful Virginia. And this place, I believe, has just this providential touch to it when you consider Thomas Jefferson is from here. You know, he had his roots here. He is a founder of our great nation. We'll talk a little bit about what it means for his inspiration to today still be guiding us. And that's thanks to this beautiful part of the country. It's really nice to get to thaw out here today too. I'm amazed at how warm it was. I was roasted out there. It's really chilly back home in Alaska, and it's about 30-some degrees. The Weather Channel said it was going to snow tonight, so it's good to get to be here and warm up and gear up for our long winter. It's made for some really cold moose hunts lately. And my daughters and I, we were out just recently moose hunting, and we were with a couple of their friends too, and we were out there just freezing, to tell you the truth, and we're learning to call moose. We've been hunting all our lives, but we're trying some new techniques, and we're trying this moose calling stuff through this megaphone thing, and we started giggling so loud out there in the woods that we're scaring away all the animals, and he's chiding us, telling us that's not the way you call a moose. And one of my daughters especially starts complaining about this, and Mom, you know, why can't we just go to the store and buy our meat under wrapped cellophane? And I'm telling her, no, we eat organic. We just have to shoot that organic product before we eat it. But we're out there moose hunting, and it's one of the things that we do as a family, though. And in Alaska, it's par for the course. You're out there enjoying God's most glorious creation and the wildlife and the mountains and the rivers and the glaciers and the volcanoes and the different geographical and geological changes that you see up there in Alaska. It's so huge, and there's so much to offer. In fact, Alaska and our clean environment up there, it is what inspired me to find out what God was all about. As a kid, one summer, I was going into junior high. I was at a Bible camp one summer, and I was looking around at God's most beautiful creation. And it occurred to me that if God was so wise and omnipotent to have planned that creation called Alaska and was so benevolent in blessing us with such beauty and such majesty and detail in that creation called Alaska, I said, well then surely he would have a plan for my life. And it was there that summer that I gave my life to Christ. I got saved as a kid back then in a Bible camp and have walked with our Lord ever since then. Ups and downs, some wild rides that he's always driven us through and gotten us through. We'll talk a little bit about that. But it was that inspiration of Alaska that opened my eyes to a grand plan that God had for our earth way, we have really been through a few things that, I don't know, maybe you haven't been through, or maybe at least it hasn't played out on the front page of the National Enquirer for you all like it does for us. But every step of the way, knowing that God is in control, so reassuring, so hopeful, just having that realization. I'm very glad that on this trip, Todd was able to come with me. The kids were busy, so they couldn't come, but Todd's backstage, and where is he? He's probably a little bit intimidated. She's doing awesome, homeschooled. She's a junior in high school working at a coffee shop, and she's doing well. And Piper, she's taking trumpet lessons, so it's nice and quiet around our house with her trumpet lessons. She takes clogging lessons. And I know Willow was looking at Piper's itinerary for one day with clogging, trumpet practice, she has basketball practice, she was entering some bakeries in this local state fair, and Willow said, I think we have the most nerd family in America when you just consider what it is the things that we sign up for. Piper's doing great. Trig, he's just amazing. Thank you so much for loving my son. Thank you. He's the light of our life. We'll talk about Trig. And Bristol's son, Trip, is just a beautiful little cherub. So kids are doing well. My goal for my kids is to try to allow them as much normalcy in this world as we possibly can. I do want their childhood to, despite some of the things that we go through, I do want some normalcy for all of them. By many accounts, my own childhood was quite normal. For being in Alaska anyway, it was normal and idyllic, and my family, very tight-knit, very outdoorsy, pretty much obsessed with sports. We were always going from one sport to another. My parents were coaches and runners and teachers. Very tight-knit, all the activities that we got to participate in usually would be as a family, so I'm trying to do the same with my kids. But as a kid, my faith grew along with the speed and the certainty that really is so unique to children. And nothing really came along in those early years to shake my foundation of faith. Just kind of going with the flow and knowing that, well, God would never give us anything that we couldn't handle, and really nothing was ever given to me that I couldn't handle. Things were pretty smooth all those years growing up, and I learned to lean on God in my weaknesses, was constantly asking for His guidance and His blessings, and whether that was in preparing for college or battling it out on some athletic field or on the basketball court, and just always leaning on Him and leaning into that leaning, which I had learned to do as a kid. That came in handy. Years later, on the vice presidential trail, again needing to lean into His inspiration for divine wisdom. One night in particular, on the vice presidential trail, I've shared this story before. I was backstage right before going out in front of TV cameras to debate Joe Biden in front of 44 million viewers, and I'm backstage before this debate and looking around in the green room for anyone who wanted to pray with me for that divine inspiration, and couldn't find anybody on the campaign staff who really was gung-ho about praying before a debate. But I found Piper. She was over there in a corner, and I said, right through me. Piper said, God speaking through you? That would be cheating. But having learned to lean on him through those early years, that came in handy. Senior year of high school, Todd comes into my life, and he was a new kid in town, and I just thought he was so cool. He had a truck. Any kid wants someone who had a truck. They were cool. And when Todd, who was a great athlete, great worker bee, my parents just loved him from the start. When he had told me that he too had given his life to Christ at a camp in his early years, it kind of sealed the deal for me. And that was 30 years ago. And after meeting Todd, there really was no looking back. 30 years ago. And I kid you not, there was no looking back. We've been married for 23 years. So when you read the things that perhaps you read as you are grocery shopping and you go by the stand there and to check out your groceries and you see those tabloids, do not believe what you read. I walked by one recently, and the big headline with the big, not very attractive picture of my face, the big headline was, Todd and Sarah Palin in the midst of a $20 million divorce. And this was, I was in Texas when I read that. I called Todd because I was not going to give them my $4 to buy the magazine, but I glanced at it and I saw that there were quotation marks around something that Todd supposedly said. That's why I called Todd and I said, Todd, they have a quote from you on the front page of this tabloid. He says, well, what's the story about? And I said, we're in the midst of a $20 million divorce. He says, $20 million? Write me the check. That's kind of his attitude, his reaction to a bunch of the BS that we have to read about or we go through. He's just always calm, cool, and collected. He's grounded, and his groundedness grounds me. Kind of brings me back to reality. And it kind of is this allowance that I have to let the weird stuff just roll off our back, like water off a duck's back, and then we just plow through onto the next issue. But that's an example of some of the stuff that we kind of go through. His groundedness keeps me grounded, though. And really, he lets me consider all aspects of an issue before I just react. That's part of his nature. So I'm extremely thankful that God brought him into my life all those years ago. I've learned much from him, including the reality is that in life, it's 10% what happens to you and 90% how you're going to react to what happens to you. Todd has a calm, cool way of reacting to circumstances and issues that has been so good for me. Oh, and when I read about all these affairs anyway that Todd supposedly had and I had, I said, yeah, between which pregnancies and babies and all these affairs, I'm sure that's been, who'd have time for that? But that characteristic in Todd's nature has really changed my perspective on some earth-shattering issues that we have been faced with as our 30 years together have unfolded. Now, the best day of my life was April 20th, 1989, when I became a mom. And I'm sure you moms out there can agree that the day you became a mom was a pretty doggone good day for you, too. Tracksburg, it just rocked my world, and you know what I'm talking about. Suddenly, my heart was so full of love. It ached, and suddenly, I had a new understanding of the sacrifice that God made in willingly giving His Son to us in order to seek and to save us. And 18 years later, I would cling to that understanding. As my only son at the time, he enlisted in the United States Army as an infantryman in the middle of a war. He got sent to a war zone, and that was one of the proudest and most bittersweet moments of my life. But clinging to what it was that God had given us in the form of this gift, our firstborn son, and knowing that God had everything under control and everything was going to be fine with our son. Once I became a mom, well, I was hooked, and I started having a lot more kids. I kind of never looked back on that either, but when I was pregnant again after track, though, absolutely on top of the world, Todd and I were it would be really cool Alaskan sports themed names and imagining what the baby would look like and what sports he or she would play. And then when I went in for just a routine checkup at 3 months, the doctor listening for the baby's heartbeat, kind of a cold doctor at the time, she's trying to hear the baby's heartbeat, and she finally said, well, there's nothing alive in there. And that rocked my world, of course. First time that my faith really had been shaken, that foundation of faith. I thought, Lord, how could you have taken from us this treasured, long hoped for baby? The baby had no heartbeat, and I would venture to guess that all of you women out there, you know someone who has experienced the pain and the loss of a miscarriage, or perhaps you have gone down that road. It's enormously painful. Maybe unless you have gone down that road, it's tough to explain how painful it is. But when it happened to us, I couldn't understand how God could let that happen. This miscarriage of hope. This was the first time that my foundation of faith was really shaken, as I said. And I felt it to the very core of my being. And I had a choice in how I would react to the situation. In the midst of really grieving through this, the two options were, you can shake your fist at God and blame him for taking away a child. I could turn away from him and doubt his goodness, and I could try to just plow ahead and do it my way. Or I could hold tight to that promise in Jeremiah 29:11. God, who promises that he knows the plans that he has for us, and these are plans for good, for hope. And they're plans to prosper us and not to harm us. And they're plans to give us hope and a future. He specifically states that his plan is not to harm us. So I chose to hold fast to that truth. And I believe that he does have that hope for all of us and for every innocent human life, including that one lost to Todd and to me. And that realization was a very personal and very painful step in my pro-life passion, and that would continue to play a very vital role in our family in the years to come. And over the years, then I experienced another miscarriage. But God, in his goodness, he gave us 3 sisters for track. And, Bristol, she was born this calm, cool perfectionist. She's a lot like Todd, and Willow was just this beautiful, tough little girl from the beginning, always trying to keep up with Todd and track and the snow machines and 4-wheelers and driving a truck, and that's been Willow's nature. And then along came Piper, and the day after I gave birth to Piper, I was back at City Hall. I was mayor at the time. She came with me, and day one of her life, she's always kind of been there by my side, literally, physically by my side, even the day after she was born. You find that when you're in elected office, or public office, you don't really ever get a vacation. You don't get days off. When I was the governor and I gave birth to Trig, that next day in the hospital, my staff came to the hospital and brought me legislation to sign some bills into law and do other things like that. And, it really hit me then that, no, you don't have much privacy and you don't have many days off. By the time that Piper arrived, though, and she's always just been my sweet little helper and great comic relief in our family. By the time that Piper arrived, I'd been in public office for 7 years already. And then before that, years on a more local level as a city council member. I enjoyed staying home with the kids. Before that, when Todd worked hundreds and hundreds of miles away up in the North Slope oil fields in Alaska. But as our family grew, I really started to become more and more aware of the need for committed conservatives to start helping out in their local communities and have a voice in local politics and policy. I decided it was really time to get involved. And from the beginning, God, I believe, has placed in me a spirit of competition. And you might not find the competitive nature listed among the fruits of the Spirit, but for me, it translated into work ethic and dedication, passion for issues, and loyalty. For instance, I made it in sports, not because I was the best athlete, but because I knew that I would be one of the hardest working athletes. And I worked for the sheer love of the game and for my teammates. Well, I love my community and I love my state too, so I was willing to work very hard to see them succeed. Knowing it was time to get involved, I volunteered in schools, did the PTO and PTA thing, and then I won a seat on the city council, was elected to 2 terms there, and after serving a couple terms, I saw kind of an ugly underbelly of a good old boy network that I think is quite prevalent in all levels of politics. And I had enough of seeing what I saw, this crony capitalism on the local level. So I know it was time for changes, so I decided that I would run for mayor. And I was elected mayor, the youngest and the first woman elected mayor in a strong mayor form of government there. And I served consecutive terms as the mayor, city manager, and then I was appointed as the state oil and gas commissioner, as the chairman of our oil and gas commission. And then it was in 2005, after a lot of prayer and petition, that Todd and I took a deep breath and we said, well, if we really want to make changes, positive changes, and clean up some corruption in our state, might have to run for governor to be able to affect changes there. And because Alaskans seem to be ready for that positive change and purging of the status quo in the state government, I beat out 2 former governors and I became the youngest and the first female governor of Alaska. To my faith and a community of real close friends and a tight-knit family, and we all encouraged one another in my walk. They helped keep my compass pointed true north. And we're lucky up there in Alaska where the skies are clear and you can see that great North Star, and I would look at it just knowing that seemed to be literally a bit of a compass, an internal GPS. We would stay focused on the great North Star, true north. That is where our compass would be. And it would remind me that our hope is an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. I would remember that Hebrews 6:19 verse and hold on to that. Now, late in the summer of 2007, many would have described me as being just on top of my game. Newsweek did an article about me, kind of plugged me out of some obscurity up there in the last frontier about this woman of power, and of course I'm always, they could see the real me, there in Wasilla with baby food on my shoulder and baby split up on the lap and, tugging me around, diaper bags and horses, real woman of power. But a lot of people were describing me as pretty much being on top of my game, that I had it under control and things were going well. I beat a tough field of competitors in the race to the top seat in politics, and my administration had a strong agenda. We were moving forward, strong pieces of legislation, bipartisan efforts to allow our nation to become energy secure. Alaska is so rich in oil and gas, and I said, we're going to do something about it. Let me tell you something about Alaska. We have billions and billions of barrels of oil waiting to flow down a pipeline and feed you. Feed this hungry market across the U.S. We have tens of trillions of cubic feet of clean and green natural gas. God has so richly blessed Alaska. We have more natural resources that can be tapped for our nation's energy security than all the oil in Saudi Arabia. It's ridiculous that we go to these foreign lands and ask them to ramp up production of energy to feed us when we have here, God gave it, we're here in these domestic areas, and we need to be responsibly drilling and mining for these natural resources. And that has been my focus, is energy security. It was President Lincoln's cabinet, his Secretary of State, William Seward, all those years ago, he recognized with this territory of Alaska at the time what it had to offer, and he purchased the territory of Alaska for 2 cents an acre from Russia. And yes, you can see Russia from Alaska. It's right next door. William Seward purchased Alaska, saying someday this territory would help secure the nation. He knew our strategic location, our waterways, our resources like fisheries. Now, of course, the resources recognize our oil and gas. What it is that we had to offer way back then, someday Alaska will come into its destiny and will secure this nation, and we won't be relying on countries that use energy as a weapon up going to jail. Some of the corrupt politicians were in jail, and they had some underhanded, backroom, illegal dealings going on with big oil. Well, we cleaned that up, and I had approval ratings at the time of about 88%, and they were like the highest approval ratings in the nation. Things were going well, and again, people thought, well, she must be on top of her game. Todd and I, as a family, we were doing very well too, just handling the endless transitions and kind of rolling with the political punches, and life was challenging, and it was fast-paced, but it was good, and it was full. It was just how I loved it, and it was kind of controlled chaos. But at the same time, internally, something seemed a little amiss. And I was traveling on state business for an oil and gas conference when I decided that I maybe should swing by a drugstore and pick up a pregnancy test and find out what was amiss. Now I get back to the hotel. I took the test and I waited, and I kept telling myself, I can't be pregnant. I guess my name is Sarah, but my husband is not Abraham. It's Todd. And the test was positive, and I was shell-shocked because here I'm thinking, I've got 3 teenagers and a little girl who's going on 25, and a busy life. Todd working a commute 1,400 miles away from the governor's mansion up to the North Slope, and first woman elected governor of Alaska. I'm thinking, oh great, those little sourdoughs up there, they're going to say, yeah right, we finally elect ourselves a woman governor, and look what she does. She goes off and gets herself pregnant. I thought, oh gosh, how am I going to handle the Neanderthals who aren't going to know how to handle a pregnant governor? But it was positive, and when I found out it was positive, I think God allowed me to have this nanoseconds of a thought, a moment, so far from home. I was the only one who knew that I was pregnant, and I thought, these are not ideal circumstances. These are less than ideal circumstances. I don't know if I can handle this. And for that nanosecond thinking, no one knows I'm pregnant. No one would ever have to know. Now, I have been the drum major in the pro-life marching band for years. I've been one of the loudest voices proclaiming the sanctity of life. And back to my adorable baby Piper, when she was a baby, literally she was the poster child for the Alaska Right to Life organization. It was her face that would be on the tickets and on the posters. And I was known for my unwavering belief that every life is precious and created in the image of God. And I am unapologetically pro-life in every circumstance. God was whispering in my ear was, are you going to walk the walk, or are you just going to talk the talk? Because he let me feel what so many other women must feel when they find themselves in less than ideal circumstances in a pregnancy that even if it's just for a fleeting moment, perhaps they think, oh my gosh, this deceptive ease that is out there in our society, maybe some women believe that you can put forth this effort to change the circumstances, that you can play God, change the circumstances, and everything will be okay if you would take that effort. For a second, understanding more and more what it was that so many women must feel. In that moment of holy contemplation, God opened my eyes to a very real struggle and to some despair that women must feel when faced with less than ideal circumstances. And I believe I went through that so that my empathy for these women would grow in that moment. I promised God that I would do whatever I could to make this gift, this child, though this was all unexpected, make this child's life as good and as love-filled as possible. Because again, I always preach that God would never give us anything that we can't handle, so why would he give me something at this moment that our family wouldn't eventually get ready for? And when I shared the news with Todd, calm, resilient Todd, he was surprised, but he was really elated. And we kept it secret, though, for a long time. And we kept it secret because we could. And privacy is a very precious commodity in any governor's office. And we talked privately then, Todd and I and our doctor, about our hopes and our dreams for this new baby. In fact, I kept this pregnancy hidden for so long that I went 7 months without people knowing. But up there in Alaska, where it's so doggone cold, you're just putting on more layers of fleece all the time anyway, you know? People just thought, you know, she's wearing a lot of clothes today. It must be pretty chilly out there, but in fact, evidently I kept it quiet for so long that some people still don't believe that Tree is my son. And out there in the blogosphere, I still read, and in some mainstream press I've read, there is no way she could have been the real biological mother of this child because, let's see, she told us that she was pregnant at 7 months and came real early, at about 6 weeks early. So he came early and he said there's no way she could have given birth to this child. She was only pregnant for 2 weeks. But I promised God that we would make this work, of course, with his guidance, and I look forward to it. Talked privately about it, though. Didn't share it with others. A bit later, after finding out that I was pregnant, and I had almost gotten my head around the idea of being pregnant, not being a spring chicken while I was pregnant, when the doctor dropped 2 bombs on us. One, she said, you're going to have a boy. We're like, oh man, see, God knows what he's doing. We dare not even pray for another boy, but that's what we wanted. We wanted bookends, boy, we wanted either end, girls in the middle. It was just so perfect, and I just, thought, wow, we dare not even pray for that. Yet God, in his goodness, is giving us what we want, something that we dare not even ask. And a second bombshell, though, that she laid on us, she said, well, there's a 1 in 10 chance that your child could be born with Down syndrome. And I kind of laughed that off because I thought, well, that means there's a 90% chance that nothing's wrong with this child, but everything's fine, and God will never give us anything that we can't handle. I pushed down my fears, though, thinking, well, that other 10% chance, though, no, God wouldn't give us anything that we cannot handle, and I don't think that I can handle being the mother of a child with special needs because I don't know if I am compassionate enough or patient enough for this, and God knows what he's doing. My sister Heather, out of all the Heath girls in our family, she was the nurturing one. She was the compassionate one, and she had a child with autism. In fact, in her profession for many years, she has worked in the school district with special needs kids. So I thought, no, God wouldn't do this twice to a family, 2 special needs kids. Heather was the one who could handle a child with special needs. I don't think I would be the one to handle this. So when the test came back that our son would be born with Down syndrome, I was stunned. And to tell you the truth, I was full of fear. I was full of fear of the unknown. I didn't know if I could meet the very special needs of a special child, and always having preached it and believed that a loving God would only give us his best, how could I be his best for this child who would always need a little bit more? God said he wouldn't give us anything we couldn't handle. I'll never forget asking Todd, as he came back from work and I was showing him, literally, they can take a picture of the number of chromosomes they would be born with. And the picture showed that our son would have an extra chromosome. And I'm showing Todd the picture, and I'm asking him, Todd, are you asking why? Why us? And Todd said, why more? To usher in the destiny that he has for all of us. Trey, he's further evidence in my life of this everlasting hope and this destiny that he has for all of us, and this proof that God loves us just as we are. I know he loves me just as I am, but he's not going to leave me that way. No, he will continue making us and shaping us into the likeness of his Son to fulfill his plans for us, and he will use circumstances and people to shape us into that. And we can all have that hope and promise that God does have a plan for us. We will find it, and we will find him when we seek him wholly with our heart. The truth is especially reassuring today, friends, as we realize country has gotten off course. I believe we at this time are not fulfilling the destiny that God has for America, but we can turn some things around. A friend and a former staffer of mine from the governor's office, she shared with me recently that she has fears about raising her own 8-month-old child now, her son, as this country is deep into perilous times. In America, where for the first time in our history, 81% of Americans are dissatisfied with the direction that we are going, and 81% of Americans are saying that they fear that the next generation is going to be worse off than we are. That's the same as most exceptional nation. We need to be known the truth, and we can still have that hope. We can have that confidence even that this country was founded on biblical principles, no matter how these historical revisionists are trying to erase God from our country. They're trying to prove us otherwise. We know that biblical principles and God's word, they don't return void. It is time for us, for you, for me, to step out in faith, to do our part to restore America's foundation. And you do not need a title or an office to make a difference in this area, okay? You don't need a title in this, what I believe, this reawakening of America that is taking place, and it's going to grow. This movement is going to grow, as I call it. It's a needed fundamental restoration of all that is good and free and right and strong about America. It is a restoration. We don't need a transformation of this country. We need a restoration of what is good about America. It's not an accident that you are here today. It's not a coincidence that you are here in Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. Think about where you are right now today. This is no accident. Virginia has played such an important role in America's history. The American Revolution and the Civil War, they wrapped up around here. They achieved first national freedom and equality, and then securing the same for all Americans regardless of color. Thank God it was wrapping up right here. And Virginia has produced so many of American leaders that we can be proud of. She's earned the nickname, the Mother of Presidents. One of them, Thomas Jefferson. His home was just a couple of miles from here where you're sitting today. Thomas Jefferson, who went on to write the Declaration of Independence. His words that he wrote, they are as timeless as they are beautiful. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. They were fearing that they would fall into the same trap that they had just escaped from just a decade earlier. Benjamin Franklin, he was 81 years old, and he was a senior-ranking member of the Constitutional Convention, and he rose to address the assembly, and it was tension-filled. And in that assembly was George Washington that day. Prayers have opened both the House and the Senate ever since. And yet, we got government officials telling us that we can't pray in the public square, and yet they do. But thank God they do. Thank God they still do. Our need for God's conferring aid and guidance is perhaps greater today than ever before. And while Congress may still pray before the start of business, we too must seek God's face for our national leaders, for our families, for our communities. American exceptionalism, it is still strong, of course, and I think that it was perhaps most clearly on display during times of national trials that we have gone through. After the terrible events of 9/11, remember, we pulled together as a people. We gathered together to pray as a nation. We proudly displayed our flag and we supported our troops. And we set out to ensure that Islamist terrorists would never strike American soil again. America's military, thankfully, has pursued and that goes far beyond being mom grizzlies, just for our immediate families. We see that strength originate from the Lion of the tribe of Judah, a fierce and loving Father God who's always expanding a family through adoption and who rescues us and gives us life. Sometimes in ways we are given life that we don't expect and that we don't perhaps understand. But America is in desperate need of mothers, wives, sisters, daughters who care and who are willing to be on the battlefield, reclaiming America's foundation, and it begins in our families, in our schools,